What's up, world? I'm Matt Newberg from HNGRY, and this is The Feed. Each episode, we'll dive into conversations with the industry insiders who are leveraging technology to shape the way we eat. On today's episode of The Feed, I sat down with Dane Atkinson, founder and CEO of Odeko, an online wholesale and technology platform powering a third of independent coffee shops across the US. In this episode, we'll talk about how Odeko's reverse franchise model arms mom and pops against Starbucks, what the future of loyalty looks like for small businesses, and the myriad of ways technology can build sustainable local economies around the Café ecosystem. Dane, welcome aboard.
Thank you, man. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to talk today and very, very welcome on your show.
You have a really fascinating background. I'd love for you to walk us through kind of what you've seen firsthand through the first .com bubble, how you joined Squarespace, and kind of this thread of focusing on small to medium-sized businesses, which seems to have spanned your entire career and led you to Odeko.
That's a lot to cover in the first question, but give it a shot. And so I'm fortunate that I got into this game as a teenager and did witness the first real crash in 2001, which is shockingly resemblant to the times that we're going through now in the tech community. Obviously, the community is much bigger, and there's different drivers to what's happening today. But the pressure on companies to really be ninjas in their operations and try to take the hard choices up front and navigate through it seem anew, even though they're a pattern that's repeated itself. On the flip side of it, though, companies that do take that approach tend to become really interesting things. And these down markets are actually incredible times to build things because you so much less noise. You're able to really focus on making a difference. And companies that maybe hadn't had that focus don't exist. So it really is it's a good window, but it's tough to get into. I was fortunate, as I said, to be there. We ended up selling our company to another public company at the time that we went through that crash with. And then I've spun up a number of other businesses. I think as a personal driver, I've always loved entrepreneurship. I think the idea that you can wake up in the morning and try to make a better world with a dream and some sweat and some tears is one of humans' greatest abilities. And it's often something that's not very well nurtured and serviced. So I kind of discovered this at that same point, decades past, and decided I'd spend my life trying to help them succeed. That has led into a long sequence of companies. As you said, most notably, I was lucky enough to be part of the Squarespace journey. I became friends with Anthony, who's the current and still CEO. He had built it in a dorm room originally, moved up to New York and was conquering one website after another. And I saw a lot of myself in him, and he was kind enough to let me join on as a CEO for a number of years. And we built it out to servicing a lot more folks. It fit to my personal theme of trying to make people feel beautiful about the work they're doing, about the websites they're creating, about the small business they had built. And I'm still very proud of what the company's achieved. The company after that was trying to give small businesses the analytics that they needed. And we felt that the tech community had started to take the data away from small business, the Facebooks and the Shopifys, and wanted to really enable that information to become leveraged. And that has brought me now almost 4 years ago to Odeko, which at last we feel we can help the physical brick and mortar business. They have long been isolated from the tech space, and with the penetration of POS and the kind of new climate and adoption, it felt like this was a time we could really make a difference. And I have ADHD, is definitely on record everywhere, and I've owned coffee shops and bars and nightclubs and everything else. And I was like, finally can do something for these people. And they're such great humans who really care more about their community and the environment, everybody, than anyone else can imagine. So we started this journey, and it's been a crazy ride through COVID and now these current changes. This last few years been nuts.
Can't wait to dive into that. Before we do, I'd love to just anecdotally hear briefly about your experience being a coffee shop owner. I think we both share a love for the roles that these neighborhood coffee shops play within the community, as the backbone, the fabric of our society, kind of this third place. What was that like for you? I think it was a shop in Williamsburg. Like, kind of is this how you kind of found the problem set here?
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think that coffee shop in particular, but it's true too for the ice cream shop and the crepes place. Like people who are going into putting their whole lives into the corner of the street do it because they want to make that community richer, do it because they want to meet people and share their story and express themselves um, in their most local fashion. They're fantastic folks. And when I did mine, I was a really bad operator because, again, ADHD does not necessarily work well. It's a tough business to pull off. And I made it all the classic mistakes that often coffee shop people make. Like, I wouldn't want to sell my soul to join Dunkin', sign up to be part of their formula. I wanted to have my own version of the story. I wanted a tin ceiling and copper table. But then I put my coffee bar too close to the backstop so that none of us could move around because I didn't know you needed, an extra 9 inches. All that learning, I think, is what makes it a joyful experience. And all the care that you give is why you can have a small shop sit across the street from Starbucks and actually survive and thrive. And Starbucks has billions of dollars invested in every piece of their business infrastructure and the advantages as long as you can imagine. You're still winning because you actually are there and care. Yeah. I find all those activities to be very wholesome. In the chapter I was in when I started the coffee shop is I just sold a tech company and I felt very disconnected from humanity, and it was a way to really dive back in and feel like I was part of the system of humans again. And I'm really enjoying, probably more so than any chapter I've had along this journey, this Odeko space, because I get to spend part of my day every day with those makers. Whether they're making pastries or they're slinging shots for their customers or thinking about the next location, they're really wonderful, grounded humans. It's a really interesting hybrid to be in between tech, operations, and community.
Love that. And I feel like I can definitely relate having, I was a product manager at Vimeo and found myself kind of, I hadn't sold a tech company, but I found myself kind of yearning for a real world experience. So I basically staged or interned at a pizzeria in the East Village and after work. And that's kind of what got me into the space I'm in now, doing what I'm doing. So I can definitely relate to that. I'd love for you to give us a breakdown of the away from home coffee market today. So we have the at home market of Folgers and all the higher end versions of that, but the coffee shop market in the US, how fragmented is it? Maybe touch a little bit on how things got shook up by COVID and kind of what's the split between independents and chains there?
So coffee in particular is actually very long tail. It's mostly independents. 60+% of the shops are under 20 locations. There are actually only a very few brands, Dunkin' and Starbucks and whatnot, that are over 1,000 locations. Sadly, those mega brands own the majority of the revenue of the industry. And it flips over because a single door of Starbucks makes usually over $2 million, and a single urban coffee shop makes usually a little bit less than $1 million. Just to give you a comparison of how much more efficient those big brands are. It's about 43,000 independent shops in the U.S. alone. There's 26,000 Starbucks and 8,000 Dunkins, a lot of other smaller brands. And almost all of them are like you, right? They wanted something different. They left the, tech platform job and they started a corner store. And they put everything into it. They're a powerful entity in Unity, but they tend to stand very much alone. Part of the problem of small business.
So yeah, I love this idea of kind of bridging the gap and enabling these guys to kind of have the buying power of a larger chain. I guess give us the pitch and the full value proposition of what Odeko is offering to these guys, and helping them kind of arming them against the Starbucks of the world, and essentially lowering the cost of the goods that they're able to procure because they're part of a larger kind of co-op here.
Yeah, I think taking the step even further back, it's only been 100 years that franchises exist, and they've taken half the revenue from what is a 1,000-year industry, right? And they've done it just because they have the power of many doors and technology and coming from the technical space, I don't know why there isn't a Squarespace for the coffee shops, why there isn't an Etsy or a Shopify, why there isn't a way that people can build on tools and not have to paint their walls green or orange. Like they can't make their own business. And they obviously they do, but they're doing everything from scratch. They're finding 10 vendors to supply their store, and they're going to craft markets, and they're figuring out how to do, payments to all these different folks. They're using third parties to do marketing and payroll and operational stuff, and there's just nothing built for them. So I think from a vision standpoint, we get to be part of it, but somebody certainly should. Those communities should be enabled. They should have the ability to stand on their own story and have technology and operations and infrastructure underneath them in places that they don't care about that make them successful. We came at the problem trying to be incredibly geeky as always, which was somewhat idiotic, but we started with a predictive AI that would help understand the future of a coffee shop. And the coffee shops were like, dude, there's way more problems than the predictions. And we actually dove into inventory because inventory is a big piece of that pie. The delta, if you think about it, like small coffee shop will spend almost 40% of their revenue on COGS. And so when you go in and you're buying stuff off their shelves, it's mostly just going back out the door. Starbucks spends 21%, right? Because they've made an efficient system. So that poor independent shop is paying often 16 cents for the paper cup you're drinking out of, where Starbucks across the streets managed to get it for 8 cents, right? It's a very hefty tax. And then we felt that that'd be a place that we could really make a difference. And for the first time, I've combined my physical lives with the digital life. We're actually moving electrons into atoms. So the pitch for Odeko is, at this point, let us try to stock your shelves. Let's put everything onto one platform so we're not wasting 8 trucks and 8 accounting departments and 8 sales departments. And let's make it really easy that when you come into work, you got everything you need, and let's make it cheaper so that delta between Starbucks and you isn't as huge. And that's worked well for us as being part of the ecosystem. It's worked really well for the baker, because the baker doesn't have to drive around with a man in the van at the end of the night and load up stores, and have to have a collections department calling a coffee shop, and have to have all the sales department pitching them. And it's worked well for a coffee shop because they end up having a lot higher reliability, get a cheaper price, and they're able to know that they've got a partner who really does care about them. A lot for us to get better, a lot for us to learn. I think this model also makes sense in a lot of different places, but at least we're tackling one of the bigger nuts that a coffee shop has to deal with.
Great. I guess can you talk? Sorry, go ahead.
No, just I was going to step on different soapboxes, but I'll go to the next question.
No, go, keep going. I love it.
I mean, I think people forget how important it is that these shops exist, how important it is that they spend their money in their local community, right? Like the chains, 80+% of the dollar you spend on coffee go out to shareholders in Japan and Hong Kong, and 80% of the money you spend on the little local shop is going to the local community, right? And those owners and operators, they care when we say we can remove carbon by not having 9 trucks drive by every day. We can do this in 1 truck. And we try to find ways to work more effectively with the ecosystem. We find a farm that's close, and we're not hauling milk from Texas, which is where some of the major franchises get their milk for the entire nation. These things matter to the small owner because they know the customer cares about it. The customers leaning in on that is such an important thing in this current time. The work I've done, I've really enjoyed sitting in a restaurant, someone coming up because they're wearing a Squarespace t-shirt, being like, I made a beautiful site and I feel really good. I've enjoyed the victories, but having a coffee shop succeed and open their second door and save money and really make a difference, it's been a very meaningful chapter. I'm very lucky to be here.
One of the things I think you
I got them all around.
No, they're great. I love to hear them. One of the things you said on an interview I listened to was, kind of this idea that it's not necessarily about what you're enabling, but it's about all of the things you take for granted of operations humming smoothly, and that things can't just not exist as far as like your supply chain, right? Like if you don't have milk, you're not in business. If you don't have beans that morning, it's just expected to work in the same way that if your site is down, you're not in business, right? If that customer is looking to buy something on Squarespace and all of a sudden there's an outage, well, that's just lost revenue, right? It's less about, enabling some new kind of experience and more about just keeping things up and running.
Yeah, very much so. We don't want to take any of the fun. We just want to take all the shitty stuff off the coffee shop. Right? The way the coffee shop engages its customers, the way it tells its story, the way it trains the staff, the way it decorates, all that is where they really show their excellence. To your point, if they don't have milk on the shelves, though, they're dead. Right? No one's coming in being like, "Congratulations, you had milk." It's an amazing shop. And if they come in and there's no milk, they're like, "What the fuck? This is a coffee shop. Like, why wouldn't you have milk?"
Yeah.
So our hope is that, and again, I think this is where tech can do a lot of good in general, is just take off the stuff that's not fun and make it just reliable. And it happened in the tech space, right? Squarespace is an incredible uptime, and that made a big difference in the day when you were building your own site. Having a coffee shop know that when they walk to work that there's milk already in the fridge and that there's pastry on the counter, that's a much better way to start your day than praying to God the truck comes by at 9:15 and drops it off, or that everything's working right. You're not running to the deli to fill things in. It's a different kind of way to execute, but the same problem. Those things just have to work.
So you carry about, I read on your site of over 400 brands. I guess, can you talk about what those types of products are and kind of like what that looked like pre-Odeko for a shop, and now with your platform, how they're able to kind of consolidate that all in a single place?
Yeah, I mean, our hope is not to force feed products to anyone, right? We're Switzerland in that sense, and shops have a lot of diversity in the way they want to do things. So we end up having quite a lot of brands, and in each of those brands, there can be, Denali has a lot of syrup flavors. Simone has a lot of syrup flavors, a lot of different variations. The idea that a shop can execute a unique offering to its customers and hand pick it is really important to us, but that they have stability in those items, and those items are reliable is the other half of the coin. So we're always fighting to get great new brands on the platform, and always listening to our shops and to the bakers and to everyone else as they plug into the ecosystem. Before us, though, it was a shit show. And not that it wasn't part of the process, but poor shop owners, if they suddenly said, we're heading into the winter and I want to add more chocolate items to my counter, they would literally have to search the web, go to markets, try to find somebody. When they found somebody, they'd have to figure out, well, do you deliver? Can I come pick up? Do you have a van? How do I pay you? Do you take checks? Do I need to give you cash? Like all that kind of stuff. And the way our portal works right now is if you want to try a new item, you find it and you say, I want a sample. And the next day there's a sample. And if you like it, you order it. And you have more options for your customers to choose from. You don't have to worry about figuring out how to pay them. You don't have to worry about figuring out how to get the keys to the shop or any of that kind of stuff. So we know for sure that it's worked out very well for the shops having diversity of items, and it's worked really well for the makers. It's the same thing. If you're a baker and you had this idea for a new cookie, you would have to go evangelize it to shops, but now you just put the cookie on the portal and every shop can see it's there. And if it's a good cookie, you'll probably sell a bunch. If it's not, then you'll move on to another item. And we'll see makers of all sorts joining our platform and then even moving to other cities and plugging into where we are, because we're in 17 cities, so they can access the community there with their offerings, which we hope that in the long term, the shelf at Starbucks from a food options will look pretty crappy from a selection option. And then when you walk across the street to a Joe Coffee or anything else, you're gonna find really unique, locally made things that make that decision all the more worthwhile. Where Starbucks can never get the diversity of items per market, and they have to make it, freeze it, and ship it. Where the independent shop can truly find its community sourcing.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about the Turbo Chef breakfast sandwiches that are fresh from frozen is the term I would like to use there. I guess at a high level, are there any other things that, laymen like myself who, don't spend time in cafes on the back end of, or like, behind the the counter. Having spent time in the trenches, what do you think are some things that we would be surprised as an audience to hear about as like some of the lowest hanging opportunities that you found for these, cafes that were running on pen and paper?
Everything's pen and paper, which is so unfortunate compared to the tech that could exist there. And we haven't solved a fraction of the problems that we know need to be taken care of. There's no centralized scheduling amongst shops. There's very poor payroll infrastructure, so baristas are often paid in a very slow time cycle with not a lot of optionality. There's really poor facilitation of like repairs and maintenance and permitting and legal and all that kind of stuff. It's just not been organized. And even the information set we launched a few months ago, like just the knowledge center of here's how other coffee shops write their ads to get a new barista. Here's how coffee shops design their counter. Here's how coffee shops do these things, because it's just not a very shared pool of information, and people have to scrounge around to get it. I will say that I think coffee shops, they are such amazing people. They take it on the chin. So in this current crisis where inflation's driven up, we've seen a very small increase in the cost of coffee that they're selling to customers. Although we can promise you the supply chain underneath it is increasing its cost, so coffee shops are often absorbing it. I don't think coffee shops are particularly good about expressing how much love they put into the products, because they have tested and tried everything that they're serving. They've often traveled across the globe to find the right bean and option for customers. They have spent hours trying to figure out how they can create a better service layer, a better experience for their customers coming in. And so much of that is just invisible when you walk in and get a quick cup, but it's done because they really cared. And if you think about it, like if you walk into a Starbucks and walk across the street to an Everyman Coffee, whatever else it is, they actually are sharper, they're tighter, they look better, they've got more feel. That little shop built Starbucks. It built everything Starbucks has, like in that little space. It's such a heavy lift, and it's often missed, like how much basic infrastructure has to go in to make sure that all the things that need to work for you to get that cup are actually in place in the morning. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, I feel like, the best technology is, quietly humming in the background, enabling these experiences, and that, no one should be made aware of it. And if they are made aware of it, it kind of defeats the purpose, right?
Yeah, it's one of the things that coffee is such a human experience that we're not huge advocates in the digitization of that relationship. Like, it's part of what makes your morning exciting is you get to see Jane and what hair color she's got, and Jim's going to be there later on in the day. Like, you want the tech to be a light switch. It's there. It runs very smoothly in the background, but it's not interfering. And there's so much dismediation of the customer and the small business that I think is unhealthy for the small business. That it's better to try to build infrastructure that is in service to them, is there for them, not trying to get between the two.
So I think in this conversation so far, we've kind of hinted at this, but I'd like to kind of pull more on this thread. And it's this analogy that I think one of your investors, GGV Capital, has. And it's, Shopify did to Amazon as new platforms like, Slice are doing to Domino's, and now you are doing to Starbucks, right? And it's this idea of the reverse franchise model for a specific vertical, right? Give all these independent, fragmented aspects of our consumer economy the same tools as the big guys and the collective buying power. How do you think about this idea of a reverse franchise model? Can we talk a little bit about that and kind of some of the analogies between what you're doing and other companies and other, like Slice, and maybe there's others that I don't know about?
I mean, I think it's a trend of very successful companies, and GGV is a very, very sharp firm and a great investor of ours, and of this thesis and of small business, because this obviously has a general effect. The analogy from Shopify is not wrong, right? Like if there wasn't Shopify and other people of that ilk, the only way you could sell the scarf you designed at home would be through Amazon. And I doubt that's going to be the best place for you as a small business long term. But in the real world, there's no gap filling, right? Like, you're getting beaten down if you're a coffee shop by the Starbucks and all the levers that Dunkin' and everyone else has, and they should have the benefits of a franchise without having to sell their soul to one. There should be a set of technology, whether you're a pizza shop or you're an ice cream shop or you're a coffee shop, whatever else it might be, that you can use to build your business. And like if you think about Shopify's first major win was just to process people's credit cards really well. But if you're an independent person trying to get out there and sell things, that was actually a really hard obstacle. Same thing for us. Our approach is we help make sure your shelves are ready to go in the morning. And if we do that right, hopefully you'll trust us to help make sure your team is paid well, get good healthcare and everything else. I think Slice has done an amazing job similarly in pizza. They help make sure that shops can engage with their customers and that they can transact well. I think there's an ilk of these kind of companies that are starting to, whether it's the obvious small ones or even companies like Sense that are helping the laundromat, like trying to help those businesses find unity together and solve problems and then be able to win because they care more. God bless GGV and other investors for backing these theses, because it's not only does it obviously make good business, and these companies have all been very successful. We've all been very lucky, bless the Lords, but I think long term people forget how important small business is to the ecosystem. It's the primary employer of humans. It's the primary inventor of new ideas. It's the engine that makes our street corners fun. A world where it's Chick-fil-A, Starbucks, McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, Starbucks, McDonald's. It's not one that breathes creativity and invention and health, right? Like that space needs the love.
Love that. I guess let's dive into the wholesale side of this. I'd love to hear more about kind of the predictive side of things, the AI, the automation, and then maybe talk more about some of the inflationary pressures and how you're able to kind of smooth that out for them.
I mean, I'm new to supply chain, and oh my God, it's a wreck. Every time we uncover something, it's just trees are cut down in Canada and sent to China, and they're sent back to Ohio, and then they're sent to New Jersey, and they're sent to Long Island, and they're dragged to a coffee shop so that you can have your paper cup. If you were to try to find the trees to supply New York's cup scene in coffee shops, you'd have to clear Central Park every 4 months just to create enough wood to make the paper. Like the chain of supplies is such a mess. We've been very fortunate that with 10,000 plus shops, we've gotten to the buying power that we're actually now at the tree level, at the manufacturer level, and able to run our own pipeline, which has made it much, much more efficient. And we started out as an AI company, so we're able to use technology to predict the consumption. So we can turn a warehouse 30, 40 times a month, which means that we don't need to create giant footprints, and we can load a truck in with a lot of inventory, so it's not creating that same kind of cost. But I think we're heading into a continuation of the supply chain nightmare that we've had these last couple of years. So it's likely China is going to have more struggles ahead of them, and that's going to disrupt more of the supplies. A lot of the inflationary costs compound invisibly. And then a lot of folks, groceries, whatnot, who are taking advantage of that compounding and making it even harder on folks. So making sure that there's advocates who are cutting through all that noise and trying to find out where real cost inflation is and try to at least be transparent and make sure that people understand, how labor has gone up across the board, how all these things factor in is really important this time, because there's going to be a lot of instability. And traditionally, we've been very proud of a large procurement team because we've gotten to be pretty big in these last few years, and we've been able to keep our stores supplied. But if you're an independent shop, you don't have anyone behind you, you can run out of paper and you can be running to grocery stores. And when you do that, that coffee you're selling, you're probably losing money on, right? Because it's not designed to be living off of grocery stores items. It's tough.
Right, but you'd rather lose the margin and maybe even go negative just to keep your customers happy so that they'll come back in the future.
You have to, because as a consumer, if I walk into a coffee shop and and this kills us because we still make mistakes, and if there's not a croissant there that you expect, you might not come back in tomorrow because you're going to go find somewhere where you can get that food mixed with it. Right, you can't get the coffee you want. We're not going to believe in the shop. And that's one of the reasons I think Starbucks did so well in the 50 years they've been around, is that they created consistency. So you're pretty sure if you walk into a Starbucks, you can get what do you call it? The last second bake off. Like you can get something and it's going to be the same thing. And if the small shop has this kind of reliability, then I think it's really important. And the shops know that. And that's why they'll go across the deli and they'll spend more money on your cup, because they know that you need to feel that you're going to get the experience you want when you walk in the door.
Pulling a little bit more on the sustainability, Fed, can you talk a little bit more about the impact that you're seeing, that you're having by consolidating all these disparate distributors into a single truck? How do you quantify the impact that you're making there environmentally?
Well, for instance, in New York City, we have 1,400 coffee shops. So we're about 4 times the size of Starbucks. Traditionally, each of those shops had 2 to 4 vendors come by a day, because there was a milk vendor and a paper vendor and a syrup vendor and a pastry vendor and another pastry vendor and another pastry vendor. And the way our system works is you don't have to. You can still keep other vendors, but you can consolidate, and that makes it more efficient on the environment, on us, on the makers in the background. So we've seen New York City did a study on us. There's actually some content out there, the off-hours delivery, because we also deliver at night, which is vastly more efficient than sitting in traffic during the day. And we were moving something like 1,200 trucks a day off city streets, which is one of the larger shifts that the city has seen. We also try to make sure that we're sourcing very ethically, because we transmit that storyline to our customers so that our coffee shop can say, all the milk we get is usually very locally sourced. We don't drag in from across state lines from Texas. And we have a partnership with Dairy Farmers of America. So if you're in Atlanta or if you're in Texas or wherever you actually are, we're getting your dairy really close. We're finding bakers that are in the same city. We're trying to keep that graph as tight as possible. So the cost of moving things, the cost of that footprint are fractional compared to what they were historically. And now we're starting programs that have gone to enough scale that we're replacing disposable pieces. Some of it's invisible in the background, like containers we don't need to get anymore because we're closed loop, like we're picking up at the manufacturer, we're making things. So we're getting rid of paper in the background, and we'll soon start getting rid of containers in the front. So the 5,000 jugs of milk that get thrown into the Pacific every day in New York don't have to be, because we can recycle those and reuse them. And all these programs are starting to make sense because we got into a scale that's meaningful enough. And I think one of the things that makes Odeko really interesting is our governor is the small owner, and they are really good. Where Starbucks governor is a shareholder or PE firm, right, who owns the stock. Our small shop owner wants to actually not burn the planet down in the process. They want us to compost their spent coffee grounds, which we do. They want us to find ways to protect this. So we have a really good long-term defense about not being an evil flip on the world, right? Because it's the coffee shops who care.
Love the focus on the circular economy and the hyper-local supply chain. It's definitely fascinating, and definitely seems like it builds upon itself like a flywheel, which is great to see. I'd love to talk a little bit more about the online ordering side and the current state of things, in the same way that we were just talking about the expectations of customers, making sure that you have that croissant every morning when they're on their way to work. There's now, I think, a new, I think COVID has expedited this, a new expectation around order ahead, right? And delivery and all these things. Delivery is actually 24% of Starbucks' sales in the last quarter they reported. And it's growing really fast. So I guess, where do you sit in this ecosystem? We have so many POS companies like Toast and Square. We have all these delivery companies like DoorDash and Uber. We have all these loyalty companies. We'll probably talk about Web3 at some point in this conversation, but where do you see yourselves playing a role within the customer-facing side of this?
So we fairly strongly feel like you should be sensitive to the relationship the coffee shop and the pizza shop and everyone has to their customer. But it isn't for us to build everything. We have an order ahead application, which is essentially free because we don't have a business that depends on it. And it's a way that people can engage with their customers if they choose to, and let the customer who wants to order on their way in the elevator to work to make it work. And I think we have a lot of customers who use Square for order ahead and a lot of customers who Toast for order ahead. They're both partners of ours. A lot of customers are looking at DoorDash for delivery. I think all those things make sense. And from our role is to try to be the advocate for the shop and make it so that those things plug in to the ecosystem in a really healthy fashion, and that those shops aren't losing the customer because the customer is so akin to ordering digitally, or they want the delivery and they can't get it from the specialty shop. Those specialty shops need to be able to leverage those tools, but they also need to be able to maintain the relationship with the actual customer. Because it is, again, to your point before, like there's something really magical in the local community. It's amazing to know Beata is the regional manager of this shop, right? Like it's a part of being part of that community. And we think digital can do it as long as it's framed and plugged in right. And our responsibility is to help those partners plug in effectively to that space and become leverageable.
And do they have to have like...
It's a slightly different view. And sorry.
No, keep going.
And we're lucky because we have a business model that makes sense where we can make an ecosystem healthier, so we can help navigate some of these choices with our shops that isn't about us making money ourselves, which we're very thankful for.
I'm not as familiar with the off-premise, ecosystem within coffee shops. At least within restaurants, if you go into a takeout area, you'll see that a lot of them historically have had multiple tablets set up, right? You had your POS system, and then for every delivery platform, you had different tablets. And then there were other companies that said, hey, we'll replace those 3 tablets with 1 tablet. And now you have POS companies saying, we'll get rid of the whole tablet and just do it all from the POS. How does it work with you guys? Do they need do they need another tablet for the Odeko order ahead, or can you keep them up and running on all their existing channels and consolidate it into a single place?
I mean, we think that tablet soup is terrible. So for us, the same way, in the sense that it appears inside of your Square terminal or your Toast terminal, and in your existing workflow. But we think that's part of the advocacy to have for this community is that there's so often a battle zone between the consumer layer tech and the small business to try to own that relationship. And I think it's better when the small business actually has some leverage and say, you know what, this all has to plug into our existing workflow. It has to be simple. We can't teach our baristas to deal with 9 different devices to order a cup of coffee. It's bananas. It's not really thoughtful of what they're going through. And in many cases, those businesses, because the only thing they do is that one thing, they have to extract so much value out of the system from both the consumer and the shop that it's painful. But I think there's a way that in better partnership, they can find a better model to work together. And hopefully this climate change, as tough as it is, will force a lot of these companies to lean in on that.
I think you're
kind of code in that descriptor, but I don't want to be too expressed angry.
I think you're lucky in that your business model allows you to be more, I guess, of a partner. You're not banking on the payments all flowing through you. You're not trying to, take eat your 50 basis points on every transaction and continue to eat into those margins. If they want to use the tech, it's there. So, I think that is more aligned. Looking more at the consumer side and zooming out, it seems like you're now at a scale having reached about a third of the entire independent market and increasing that influence that, this idea of a consumer facing app could be something interesting here as far as rivaling, a top food and beverage app in the app store, like a Starbucks. What is the longer term vision for that, marketplace where, what is going to drive someone like myself to download the Odeko app and want to use it to earn points? Are those points going to be used across all of your merchants? Are they going to be locked to the single merchant? What do you think is the main value proposition for me in a few years using this as my go-to consumer-facing coffee discovery app?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's a changing soup. I think philosophically, our role is to provide a conduit to a community and not take on ownership of the community, right? I think if you think about like Etsy's been a pretty good player in that. You think Etsy is a brand, but you very quickly understand it's an amalgamation of great little stories, and that you go there to find those great little stories. So where we think Odeko plays, and it's not just in the app layer, it's I think in a lot of different ways, we should help provide the tools that the community can use to engage with the customers. And we don't actually think that the specialty shop is going to land in the almost 50% digital transaction that Starbucks does, because we think that part of their reason for being is sharing their story with their community and having that engagement. But where we can provide tools and say, you can be in the Odeko directory, and you can right now, and that helps for discovery. If there's someone's coming into a community and they want to find out what shops in Austin are really interesting, they can use us. But even then, here's another way that we can help make sure that you get your, Google My Business page up. Like how do you become available when people search in Google for a coffee shop? And right now, if you do, it's pretty bad. You almost always just see the chains. You won't see the smaller shops there. But where we can help those shops understand how to quickly flip those levers, and then to the point of like Starbucks is leaning in very heavy in loyalty and very heavy in a lot of places. We feel there's another failing of society, that the large enterprise has pulled value out of the local community, where they are saying, if you want to actually advertise to the person who lives across the street from the coffee shop, you need to go spend money on Instagram to get to the person across the street, right? Where you want to do these somewhat basic things, all of a sudden it's been taken out to a cloud provider that's very far away. And our hope is that we can continue to innovate and find tools where the loyalty can be not necessarily run through us in some platform, but that you can help enable loyalty to the customer, and you can share in that loyalty with the other coffee shops down the street, and you can share in that investment from the consumer, because there's no reason for it to actually have to leave the small business to do. The problem is that the small businesses are so focused on what they're doing that they don't get to build that community across each other. They don't get to look at the tech solutions out there. And there's a lot of technology. I know that you mentioned that we're talking about Web3 and these kind of things. There's a lot of very open platform tools that if coffee shops had lined up, that I think they could use very easily to share in that benefit, share in that loyalty with their customer base. So from a vision standpoint, we're hopeful that in 2025 and 26, when you engage in a coffee shop, you're getting benefit automatically, and it's not necessarily owned by some brand. It's your relationship with that shop, and when you walk across the street to the crepes place, that's providing value there too. I just think it's just a matter of information and tools. That's another soapbox I probably have accidentally stepped on, but I think we were always frustrated seeing so much of the money that is in a community getting pulled out of the community to go to some third party layer, when at the end of the day, the coffee shop just wants everyone within a 5-block radius to know that they've got an amazing cookie, right? And they've got an amazing opportunity, and they're willing to share that story with the hardware store and the ice cream shop and share in that community. Just, I think there are ways to make that more healthy down the road.
Yeah, the CAC arbitrage of a Starbucks is just not even a fair fight against the local business. If you think about what they're able to spend by virtue of having all these banners in all these different cities, they can aggregate that spend. They can spend a lot more because they have that density, whereas a single mom and pop is just never going to be able to compete. So it makes a lot of sense.
And they lose. So many customers, I think, would like to go into the specialty shop, but because they can't access them through their phone and they can't gain loyalty that feels like it's useful, they steer away, and it's a real cost to the small shop. And they spend billions, quite literally, in investment in those tools. So they're creating addictive patterns and locking customers in, and as you're noting, like buying ads and becoming present in a way that the small business can't. But at the end of the day, what everyone forgets is small business actually runs society. our coffee shops, our 1,400 coffee shops in New York, half of the New Yorkers in the city go through them every week, right? Like they have presence and relationships with humanity in a way that the big franchises wish they could and are buying through ads and everything else to achieve. The only thing is the shops have to start working together, start sharing in that value and that communication with customers. They have to let people know that they're all here, and there's just been lack of glue. I think Slice and us and a lot of these new companies, hopefully we keep our values high and we keep on fighting for that, because I think if it comes together, again, we're very hopeful that in the far future, when you hit a new town, you don't default into a Starbucks app. You go explore your community, you find something that's new, and you enjoy that experience, and that consumers want to spend their money on those that care versus those that are machinery. And we hope to be a piece of it, but I think that there seems to be a trend that's driving towards this.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, is there any hope for Web3, kind of at a high level? Do you see anything today that's actionable and they may be into the future? I've been playing around with this new Starbucks Odyssey. They're definitely trying to change behavior of some of their most loyal fans in the sense that they're trying to gamify things to get you to earn these stamps, and they're on a blockchain, but it's completely invisible and completely opaque to the end consumer what is actually going on under the hood, and they're leveraging Web3 to like position themselves as some sort of thought leader. But what is actually happening here? Is this something that you're bullish on? Is this something that you think you guys are looking at on behalf of these independents to solve some of these problems, or is it just another buzzword?
I think how Starbucks uses it is as a buzzword. And same thing when they were using AI. Well, that's actually not entirely true. They will get success from it. There is actually technically pieces of it that are real, but they're certainly trying to exaggerate its potential. We're actually pretty excited about what the new future of tooling looks like, because it's distributed and doesn't necessarily cost the shop. So it's possible for there to be a token or currency or whatever we want to think of it as a method that's shared between coffee shops and between ice cream shops and between that community. I'm not sure we're going to be the one to get enough unity in that community to drive that there, but it would seem to be a durable trend, and it would seem to be just a natural fit that a coffee shop could provide value to its customers in a way that resonates in a larger sense than just their doors. And it would have been very hard to spin that kind of transactional platform up until some of the modern tech has come around. We are certainly experimenting it. We've done our own micro chains and tried to figure out how we could share credit between the hardware store and a coffee shop and look at that. We don't think it's us. That's one of the nice things about the blockchain. It wouldn't be for us to own, but we may be one of the people who advocate for, here's a way that you could quickly credit customers in a chain, and that would be recorded and shareable across a bigger community. I think that a lot of that, we're at this weird point in society where some of the metaphors that we had lived with no longer have to exist, and this enablement can actually happen where, in this case, small businesses can actually tap into some unifying substrate, some glue between them that makes their whole space way more available and much more engaging. And I think from your point of like Starbucks not necessarily being transparent, if something of that nature spawns, particularly if it comes out of the community and the community leans into it, then I think the consumers and the shops and the baristas and the bakers and the farm all will feel participation, and all will drive for a much healthier system. And even internally, like we do chain of custody for our items, like when we pick it up at the farm, we pick it up at the baker, and I don't think it would make us like literally as happy as could be is if in your experience you knew that milk came from 20 miles away and that the baker literally was 15 blocks away from the shop you're in, and that was baked off at 4 a.m. and we picked it up and we got it to the shop by 7 a.m. because that's not a story that a lot of these chains would want to share. But it will take all of us working together to get that there.
I love that vision, and yeah, certainly hope that the incentives are there to get that adoption, to get the momentum really going there over the next decade or so. What I'm hearing from you, kind of peppered throughout the conversation, is ice cream shop, crepe shop, Obviously, being a venture-backed company, you have to swing for the fences. So is it safe to say that Odeko in the next couple of years will start to look at other adjacent verticals, the dessert shops out there, any other like small fragmented businesses facing with similar set of characteristics here?
Yeah, it's maybe it's a preventive to the ADHD personality of trying to do everything that we focus on a single customer. I've always admired the companies who've built very horizontal platforms. I find it very hard to make something really fit unless you live that space. Coffee is our anchor. Coffee is a model we need to know and make really succeed. I'm pretty sure if we build a car that can drag 2,000 pounds, that someone else will find use for it. I'm fairly sure that the juice bars and the bubble tea shops and all of them will rather have their shelves stocked and pay less and have that infrastructure in place. And we certainly don't hold one small business up over another, and we'll want to help them. The reason we've kept so confined to coffee is we don't think we've actually got it right yet. There's just a lot of stuff we still need to figure out, a lot of things we need to tighten up before we feel like we should broaden it greatly. For sure. We think that more than just from our own venture standpoint and building a successful company, and we've seen this, like Van Leeuwen's, an ice cream shop that is one of our customers. We've seen a lot of shops be like, I know you're servicing the coffee shop and I use the same stuff. I buy a lot of milk and I buy a lot of paper. Can you help me? And it would be unfair not to try to make this work for as many people as we could down the road.
That's awesome. I guess as we come on the end here, I'd love to hear more about where do you think we are in the evolution of these different waves of coffee, right? We had like the third wave coffee. I don't even really know where the boundaries are here. Is it because they were doing cortados or whatever, something fancy? What is third wave coffee? Where are we today? And then what is going to be fourth wave coffee? And maybe you could talk about certain companies that I would put into the kind of trying to push the envelope. I maybe would mention Foxtrot, which is kind of this modern hybrid online offline bodega that's based in Chicago that's really partnering with local coffee companies. And then you have the Blank Street push cart model that's also taking up leases in these very small kiosks. So I'd love to hear where you think we are today and where we're going.
Well, I mean, all of our crystal balls are pretty foggy, but I'll give you our guess. I think coffee is constantly evolving and society is evolving between COVID and market pressures and inflation. We're in very dynamic times as a people. The third wave really was about providing a specialized experience, sourcing your coffee yourself. It did have the hallmarks of like second wave and the Starbucks third space lots. So a lot of those shops had space for people, and there's this kind of pivot, and which we've seen incredible success. Blank Street's a customer, Aroma Joe's a customer. A lot of these folks that have built, drive-through or fast pickup are seeing huge value creation. And we're actually also now seeing with the kind of change in workforce and work at home that extra space also makes sense. I think that, and maybe this is somewhat biased, my belief is that the fourth wave of this next cycle is a combination of what was once the artisanal desire, but also good operating practices. We think that coffee shops are turning into a business that's focused on its community, and that they will really take care of their team members. They'll be able to make a healthier living for themselves. They'll be able to have more optionality, and that they will embrace a lot more models. So it won't just be every coffee shop looks the same. I think there'll be coffee shops on office floors. There'll be carts in, parks. There are going to be shops that are huge, and they're actually half co-working, half coffee shops. There's going to be shops that are integrated into other business models, like the Foxtrot. There's going to be a lot of variation, but they're all going to have as a default a real care for their coffee, and hopefully a care for the way they take care of themselves. Because one of the crimes of small business, and this is an irony, if you ever ask them, any one of them, from the person selling the scarf to running the small business, how much their costs to do anything, they'll never factor their own time in. They'll never include themselves. They're always giving. They're always trying to help everybody else, and never really consider themselves a part of the ecosystem. And I'm hopeful that operators of all sorts in the future think of it as a living career, even the first year or two of its business, and build a business that can be something that's generational for themselves. And we're seeing that. We're seeing operators really get smart. And it's been tough times, so it's hard in the community. But we're also seeing, as you noted, like a lot of different variations in the model of what's offered.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like what you hear, please hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. And if you're curious to get a first-hand look at the cutting edge of food and tech, check out HNGRY.tv. That's Hungry with no U, where you can join in on live conversations like these or sign up for the free weekly newsletter.